Hi, I'm Joe Graydon.
I'm Terry Graydon. Welcome to this podcast of the People's Pharmacy, where we bring you the stories behind the health headlines.
This podcast is brought to you by Redix Industries, makers of Utterly Smooth Body Cream. 800-345-7339, on the web at uttercream.com. Antidepressants are among the most commonly prescribed medications. How well do they work? What about side effects? This is the People's Pharmacy with Terry and Joe Graydon.
Drugs for treating depression are controversial. Clinical trials have produced conflicting results. Some show benefit, but many show little, if any, advantage over placebo. What are the pros and cons of this popular class of medications?
Patients aren't always warned that stopping some antidepressants may be difficult. Withdrawal symptoms of dizziness or sensations of electric shock can complicate life for weeks. Are there effective non-drug approaches for psychological distress?
Coming up on the People's Pharmacy, learn about the benefits and harms of psychiatric drugs.
First, this news.
In the People's Pharmacy Health Headlines, why do some people develop celiac disease while others with similar genetic makeup do not? Researchers writing in the journal Science propose that the explanation may lie in an infection. In celiac disease, eating foods containing the protein gluten triggers an immune reaction that damages the intestinal lining. Gluten is found in wheat, barley, and rye. The only treatment for celiac disease and its complications is to avoid gluten completely. But why do some people react so fiercely? The study showed that intestinal cells exposed to a reovirus respond to gluten with an inflammatory response. The reovirus does not in itself cause disease symptoms, but exposure to this virus seems to trigger the autoimmune reaction that leads to celiac disease later in life. If a vaccine could be developed, it might protect children from this gluten intolerance.
Bisphenol A, or BPA for short, is a compound that helps keep hard plastics hard. It's also found in cash register receipts and the linings of food cans, so most Americans are exposed to BPA every day. This chemical is known to be an endocrine disruptor because it can mimic estrogen. Now scientists at Duke University have found that BPA can make inflammatory breast cancer cells resistant to treatment. When these cells are treated in the laboratory with BPA, they generate more of the signaling molecules called epidermal growth factor receptors on the cell surfaces. A low dose of BPA doubled the amount of EGFR. The breast cancer cells grew faster and were less likely to die when treated with common anti-cancer drugs.
Replacing BPA in common products allows manufacturers to claim that their goods are BPA-free. It doesn't mean that the plastics, receipts, or paper currency containing replacement compounds are safe. Bisphenol S, or BPS, is one of the most widely used replacements. Testing in breast cancer cells shows, however, that BPS also mimics estrogen and is an endocrine disruptor. BPS-induced breast cancer cell growth comparable to estrogen. The researchers believe that BPS might make breast cancer more aggressive.
Scientists have found another type of compound that disrupts the endocrine system. Pyrethroids are synthetic chemicals similar to naturally occurring pyrethrin. Like pyrethrin, the pyrethroids repel or kill insects. They now account for approximately 30% of pesticides used worldwide. Chinese scientists report that these speed the onset of puberty in males. They studied 463 boys between 9 and 14. Those with higher urinary levels of pyrethroid-derived compound were far more likely to be at an advanced stage of genital development. Mouse studies confirmed that pyrethroids hasten the onset of puberty. The researchers urge caution in using these insecticides around children.
Inhaled corticosteroid medications such as beclomethasone or fluticasone are used to calm inflammation in the lungs. They make it easier for people with asthma or COPD to breathe. doctors feel more comfortable prescribing inhaled steroid medication rather than pills like prednisone because they assume the inhaled drugs have fewer systemic side effects. A large Dutch study now throws that assumption into question. The investigators reviewed records from 140,879 people participating in the Lifelines study cohort. Approximately 10% of this group was using a corticosteroid drug in some form. Further analysis showed that women using an inhaled corticosteroid were 40% more likely to have metabolic syndrome, higher body mass index, blood pressure and sugar, and fats in the bloodstream. This is an association and does not prove that corticosteroids cause metabolic syndrome. But since this cluster of risk factors increases the danger of diabetes and heart disease, doctors and patients may want to monitor inhaled corticosteroid use more closely.
Non-sugar sweeteners are extremely popular because people assume they'll help them lose weight. A new study contradicts that idea. Test tube research suggests that the artificial sweetener sucralose can alter the metabolism of stem cells from fat tissue. And that's the health news from the People's Pharmacy this week. Welcome to the People's Pharmacy. I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. It's estimated that 1 in 6 adults takes a psychiatric medication. Antidepressants are taken by 12%. Another 8% take sedatives, sleeping pills, and anti-anxiety medications. How well do these medicines work? Do they have long-term consequences?
We'll be getting a wide range of perspectives on the safety and effectiveness of psychiatric drugs. Later in the show, we'll speak with Dr. Samantha Boardman, a psychiatrist who prescribes such drugs, but also uses non-drug approaches to help people regain their equilibrium. First, though, we turn to Dr. Peter Gøtzsche. He's a Danish physician and a medical researcher. He's leader of the Nordic Cochrane Center in Copenhagen. His books include Deadly Medicines and Organized Crime, How Big Pharma Has Corrupted Healthcare, and Deadly Psychiatry and Organized Denial.
Welcome back to the People's Pharmacy, Dr. Peter Gøtzsche.
Thank you so much.
Dr. Gøtzsche, you're associated and in fact, co-founder of the Cochrane collaboration in Denmark. Could you tell us a little bit what that is? We often refer to Cochrane collaboration reports, but I think a lot of our listeners don't completely understand what this organization represents.
Yes, the Cochrane collaboration started in Oxford in the United Kingdom, and I was one among 80 people who met 23 years ago and decided to start this collaboration. And the reason was that we had realized that we cannot trust the published medical literature. It exaggerates the benefits of treatments and it underestimates the harms, and sometimes even death have been left out of published trial reports. So we wanted to do better and to collect the randomized trials for a given intervention and then go through the reports critically and publish a summary of the evidence in a database that people can subscribe to all over the world.
Dr. Gøtzsche, one of the things we've noticed about Cochrane reports is that frequently medications or treatments, other types of treatments that have become very popular, get reviewed in a Cochrane collaboration, and the answer is there's not enough evidence to really say that this treatment works. So when a Cochrane collaboration comes up with a report that says this really works, we actually believe that.
Well, you should never believe anything at face value. You should always question what people say and what they write. And even though we try to do our best in the Cochrane collaboration, we are handicapped by the fact that what is getting published is so often biased and too positive. So for that reason alone, Cochrane reviews, many of them will also be too positive. And for drugs, for example, we know that if we go to the European Medicines Agency and get hold of these long reports that have been filed there for every single trial, they can take up thousands of pages for just one trial. Then our research and others' research has shown that we get quite a different picture and many more harms caused by the various drugs. So the most reliable drug reviews are actually those that say that the treatment doesn't work. And if they say that the treatment does work, this is where we have to be critical and ask ourselves, is this really true? And if a Cochrane review says that there are few side effects, we should also be alert, because often even serious harms have been concealed by the drug companies.
Dr. Gøtzsche, your first book was Deadly Medicines and Organized Crime, How Big Pharma Has Corrupted Healthcare. Your latest work is Deadly Psychiatry and Organized Denial. Can you tell us a little bit about what prompted that book and what you discovered?
Yes. 10 years ago, I got drawn into research on psychiatric drugs because a person wanted to do a PhD with me that was about antidepressant drugs and benzodiazepines, the old-time nerve pills. And since then, I have done a lot of research on psychiatric drugs. And finally, I felt I needed to write a book because I realized that people's perception of psychiatric drugs is very, very badly wrong. And I can give you one example. Based on my own research, I have come to the conclusion that antidepressant drugs do not seem to have any real effect on depression. This might be shocking for people, but I stand by my conclusion. I've explained in my book how I arrived at that conclusion. And not only that, this autumn we published 2 very important reviews where we demonstrated that when you give antidepressant drugs to healthy people, often students who take a drug to earn money for their studies, and women who are about 50 years of age who take a drug because of urinary incontinence. When we looked at these trials, we found out that antidepressant drugs give normal people who don't have a psychiatric disorder side effects that increase the risk of suicide and violence. So these drugs actually increase the risk of suicide. And there is no age limit where these drugs are not dangerous. And then you have psychotherapy, which decreases the risk of suicide. So if you ask a 6-year-old child, would you use drugs that increase the risk of suicide for patients who are sad and depressed, or would you suggest psychotherapy that actually decreases the risk of suicide? The answer is obvious. But what is it we are doing? We are irrigating so many people with antidepressant drugs, even people who are not depressed but are just going through a divorce, or they failed an exam, or they have financial problems, or they are all sorts of things. They are used as happy pills, just like diazepam and the other benzodiazepines were used 40, 50 years ago. So we are harming the population on an enormous scale with antidepressant drugs. And then I have even not talked about the other psychiatric drugs that are also harming the population.
Dr. Gøtzsche, I think what you have just said is really fascinating, because we have been told for years that the reason that people on antidepressants sometimes commit suicide is that they are depressed, and that depression makes people commit suicide, which it certainly can do. But you're saying, aside from that, these drugs have an independent effect that makes people more likely to commit suicide. Is that right?
Yeah, that's definitely the case. And of course you're right that depressed people have a higher risk of committing suicide than other people. But if you give them antidepressant drugs, that risk increases even further. So we are doing the wrong things. And the Food and Drug Administration has warned for years against using antidepressant drugs for children and adolescents for exactly this reason, that there is a suicide risk. But we have found that there is no age limit for that suicide risk. It also occurs in older people than adolescents.
Now, Dr. Gøtzsche, there are a lot of health professionals who are listening, and they're going, but wait just one sec. I prescribe drugs like, fill in the blank, fluoxetine, Prozac, sertraline, Zoloft, paroxetine, Paxil, and some of the newer drugs like Effexor and Pristique and Lexapro. We could go on. There's a whole bunch of them, and they make such a wonderful difference for my patients. There are patients who say, this is the first time I felt normal in my entire life. These drugs are miracles for me. What the hell is he talking about?
This is totally wrong. Some people sometimes feel that they are helpful, but this is generally because they can cause euphoria in some people, and this can progress into mania. And other people, they become worse when they take these drugs. They become more sad. So on average, they don't work. Even the clinical trials that the drug industry has carried out, which are quite flawed, even in these trials, the patients, whether they are children or adults, they say that the drugs don't work for them. It's only the psychiatrists in the same trials that say that the drugs work. But you should listen to the patients who will tell you that when they don't know whether they receive placebo or active drug, they say that on average the drugs don't help them. And that is a very strong message. Now, what happens in clinical practice is that a doctor gives a drug, and after some weeks the patient is better. And then often both the patient and the doctor, they feel this is because of the drug. After a few weeks, most people with a depression will be considerably better if you do absolutely nothing. One thing I need to say that is very important, it can be dangerous to stop a psychiatric drug from one day to the next. It can be quite dangerous. Patients should never do this. So if they want to stop a psychiatric drug, they need to do it slowly and preferably with professional advice.
Dr. Peter Gøtzsche, thank you so much for talking with us again on the People's Pharmacy.
Well, I'm happy that you decided to interview me because psychiatric drugs are doing so much harm to our population. So we need to tell people about this. Thank you so much.
You've been listening to Dr. Peter Gøtzsche. He's a Danish physician and leader of the Nordic Cochrane Center in Copenhagen, Denmark. He's author of Deadly Medicines and Organized Crime, How Big Pharma Has Corrupted Healthcare, and his most recent, Deadly Psychiatry and Organized Denial.
Many health professionals disagree with Dr. Gøtzsche. No one should ever stop an antidepressant without a doctor's supervision. After the break, we'll learn about the FDA adverse event reporting system called FAERS.
You're listening to The People's Pharmacy with Joe and Terry Graydon.
If you like the information you hear when you listen to The People's Pharmacy, you may also enjoy our book published by National Geographic. It's The People's Pharmacy Quick and Handy Home Remedies, available online at peoplespharmacy.com or at your favorite bookstore. Welcome back to The People's Pharmacy. I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. The People's Pharmacy is brought to you in part by Red X Industries, makers of utterly smooth creams and lotions that deeply moisturize to make dry skin feel soft and smooth. The number is 800-345-7339. The website is uttercream.com.
If you would like to order a CD of this show, you can call 800-732-2334. Today's show is 1075, The number again, 800-732-2334, online at peoplespharmacy.com.
Today, we're discussing the safety and efficacy of drugs for the treatment of mental illness. Later, we'll talk with Dr. Samantha Boardman, attending psychiatrist at Weill Cornell Medical College. She prescribes such drugs, but she also uses non-drug approaches to help people achieve mental health.
Now we turn to Thomas J. Moore. He's a senior scientist at the Institute for Safe Medication Practices. He's also project director for the publication Quarter Watch. His publications include Prescription for Disaster, Deadly Medicine, and Heart Failure. His article on utilization of psychiatric drugs was published last year in JAMA Internal Medicine.
Welcome back to the People's Pharmacy, Thomas J. Moore.
Terry, it's great to be here.
Tom, you study something called FAERS, F-A-E-R-S, and our listeners are kind of interested, what the heck is FAERS and why is it important?
Once a drug gets approved by the FDA, it goes out on the market and it's taken by thousands, sometimes millions, sometimes 10 millions of people. And things that were not spotted in clinical testing emerge. They're reported by doctors, they're reported by patients. They're reported to the FDA, and there's a system around the world. And so one of the things I do is to analyze those reports, which we call adverse event reports.
It's a little confusing because, people have access to that, not just physicians and researchers, but, just plain folks. But unscrambling, making sense of all of that data is just kind of overwhelming. So how do you read the tea leaves, so to speak, from the Food and Drug Administration adverse event reporting system?
Well, maybe three ways, Joe. Number one is experience, which is we've been analyzing these data, which are now number in the millions of reports, for over 10 years. Secondly, for our publication called Quarter Watch, we have a very experienced team of senior medical doctors and drug safety experts. So we bring a lot of experience to it. And then thirdly is complicated stuff and statistical methods that help us to analyze where are the important signals in these data that we haven't seen before.
Tom, one of your more recent publications was a research letter published in JAMA Internal Medicine about people using psychiatric drugs. Could you please summarize for us what you found?
Yes, the question, because my job is managing the risks of drugs, that's one of my jobs, is how do we do that? To do that job right, you also need to know what drugs are people exposed to and what might be some of the problems from sheer scale. So I use some government health survey data to examine how many adults were taking psychiatric drugs. Now, what do I mean by that? I mean antidepressants and sedatives and tranquilizers and sleep meds, that's the third one, and then the most powerful psychiatric drugs, which we call antipsychotics.
And what did you find?
Well, we found that the use of psychiatric drugs is very, very frequent in the United States. So overall, of the adult population, 12% were taking antidepressants, 8% were taking sedatives, tranquilizers, or sleep medications, and about 2% were taking antipsychotics. But there were some big differences in some of the subgroups.
Such as?
Well, white adults were more than twice as likely to be taking a psychiatric drugs as either black or Hispanic or Asian adults. Women, about twice as likely to take the drugs as men. And then when we march up and down the age groups, it turns out that the oldest group of adults were about 3 times as likely to be taking a psychiatric drug as young adults.
That's very interesting, although it's a little bit difficult to figure out precisely what's going on there.
Well, it is. There were some areas when we did this analysis that really raised some safety concerns. One of the other findings was we discovered that 84% of the people taking psychiatric drugs were doing so long term. Why is that a problem? Well, first, for some things, sleep medications like Ambien, the safety recommendation is only occasional use. In other cases, we know that people who have been on these drugs for a long time are going to have withdrawal and rebound symptoms. And thirdly, some drugs like antidepressants have warnings that you should periodically reevaluate the use. And so I was concerned to sort of discover that people who started psychiatric drugs, at least in our one-year sample, didn't stop them at all.
I am also alarmed to hear you say that older adults are more likely to be taking some of these psychiatric drugs than anyone else, because I think older adults are even more susceptible to potential side effects as a result.
That's true. It's a second trend I've seen before, which is the fact of the matter is we give older adults many, many, many more medications than we do younger adults. It seems like in some cases, it's not unusual to find an older adult with 5, 6, 8 medications. And I think that is an area that may well have been on some of your earlier shows that we need to be much more careful about than we are right now.
One of the things that concerns us would be falls. And when falls occur, fractures. And there's been a study just recently suggesting that people taking antidepressant medications may be at greater risk of both falls and fractures, whether that's because they're dizzy or because there's some biological effect. That's disconcerting. Any thoughts about, this potential complication?
Well, yes, this is a complication not only of antidepressants, but particularly of tranquilizers and sleep medications, and it's a problem for a couple of reasons. Antidepressants, they're sort of a split. A substantial group of patients actually become more anxious, have trouble sleeping, and another group of patients, it makes them dopey and sedates them. So if you fall in, if you will, fall in that group, then I think your risk of falls is going to increase. The second problem we have with the sedatives and sleep medications, especially if they're long-acting, is older people do not break the drug down as rapidly and as quickly. So they're going to very likely have a sedative hangover in the next morning. And that's particularly true for what we call the longer-acting sedatives and sleep medications, so they won't have worn off in the morning. So it's a substantial risk.
So the big problem, of course, is stopping these drugs. And when the anti-anxiety agents, the benzodiazepines like diazepam that was so familiar, Valium, came along, people thought that they were incredibly safe and you could take them and then stop and no problems. And then we learned that, well, not so fast. When you stop taking them, you may experience anxiety and insomnia. And in the early days, a lot of clinicians said, well, you see, it's just the original problem coming back. So what you're experiencing is not a rebound from the drug or withdrawal. It's just that you're an anxious person and now the anxiety and insomnia have returned. Well, ditto for some of the antidepressants. So, people said, well, I stopped my Paxil suddenly or my Zoloft, and now I'm feeling depressed and anxious and irritable and I can't sleep. Oh, it's just the depression coming back. So now we know, well, actually, there may be withdrawal from those. I think a lot of people don't realize that even the antipsychotic drugs like Abilify or Seroquel can also cause rebound. Can you help us understand this rebound phenomena and why it's likely to lead to long-term use?
Yes, actually, all of these psychiatric drugs that we were talking about have potential risks of rebound and withdrawal effects. That is because many cases it's not the direct effect of the drug. It is the fact that the chemistry and the circuits in your brain readjust to the intrusion of this drug. And so when you stop the drug, it can take a long time for your brain circuits and chemistry to restore itself to normal. So, that's the sort of biochemistry of it. Now, the second part is that I think both clinicians and patients underestimate in case of many drugs, how serious the problem is. Let me give you an example. Cymbalta, which is a very popular antidepressant. So a study that I know of that got very little attention was done of exactly what happened when people stopped the drug suddenly. Well, the result was 76% of the patients experienced some withdrawal symptoms when they were specifically asked about it. If we were to talk about drugs like alprazolam or Xanax, those have FDA addiction warnings about them. DEA addiction warnings about them. Antipsychotic drugs are less well studied, but they make very profound changes in how your body processes a critical neurotransmitter called dopamine. So it is almost certain that they're going to have substantial withdrawal effects.
You know, I remember talking to one of the researchers at a drug company, I think it was Roche, and the sleeping pill was Dalmane, fluazepam. And they said, well, it has a long half-life, that is to say a couple of days, but then it's gone from the body within a week or less. And so people couldn't possibly be experiencing withdrawal symptoms because the drug is out of their system. And what you're suggesting is not so fast. The body adjusts to the exposure of the drug, and it may take not just a few days, but weeks and perhaps in some cases even months for those circuits to reestablish themselves.
That is one of the major drug risks that is underestimated. There are books that you can get. If you're thinking about stopping one of these drugs, the taper can be very, very important. And it varies somewhat by drug. You might need to see a physician who had experience in taking people off these drugs. So it is a non-trivial problem. It is one of maybe the most underestimated drug safety issues that we have for psychiatric drugs.
Does the FDA offer doctors or patients any guidelines on withdrawal?
Very limited. I just finished sort of looking at antidepressants and found problems with the official material for doctors with every one of the four most widely prescribed drugs. Lacked the information that you can obtain if you do look at the proper published clinical studies.
Tom, I'd like to ask you about another publication that you published recently with Dr. Kurt Furberg about the harms of antipsychotic drugs. What are the primary harms that you found?
First, let me just briefly talk about antipsychotic drugs. We are talking about drugs like Risperdal, drugs like Seroquel, a drug called Haldol, and these drugs are for the first primary use of these drugs are to combat psychosis, and by that we mean people who are hearing and seeing things that are not there, or have paranoia. The CIA is secretly sending them messages on NPR, a literal case I know about. And so these, and also patients we would describe as having schizophrenia. And these were regarded as almost miracle drugs 25 or 30 years ago. And now we're learning that they really have adverse effects, and very serious ones. And the major ones that I focused on in this paper had to do with movement disorders. The same neurotransmitters that these drugs affect, which have to do with mood and behavior, also deal with your motor system. And so we have two kinds of side effects that are of really great concern. One has the technical name of tardive dyskinesia, but what it really means is your muscles involuntarily twitch, and it could be a finger, it could be your eye, your tongue could protrude. I once rode on a plane with a young woman who raised her hand, its entire limb, every 5 seconds. It's like she was raising her hand in class. The other kind is called Parkinsonianism, and then muscles sort of freeze up, and you sort of lose control, very much like in Parkinson's disease. And these injuries occur at very high rates.
So, Tom Moore, the question is what to do with the information that you have discovered, because no one should ever, ever, ever stop an anti-anxiety agent, an antidepressant, and certainly not an antipsychotic unless they are under careful medical supervision. And there's a very long withdrawal process so that they don't experience these kinds of symptoms that you've been talking about. But I guess, what is it that you've been trying to communicate to health professionals as well as patients through your various publications when it comes to psychiatric drugs and how long people take them?
I believe that physicians need to do, and both physicians and patients, number one, need to be aware of the problem. Number two, they need to realize that there needs to be a taper. Now, everybody may not. People will vary about how much the side effects will occur. It depends a little bit by drug. It depends on the individual's own brain and how it has adjusted and what kind of changes it's made to accommodate the drug. And so there's variability. And thirdly, you're going to need some patience and not to mistake it's my problem coming back for a side effect of the drug. I mean, I have a colleague who's a medical doctor and a senior drug regulator who said it took her 6 months to get off one of the major antidepressants. So it can be difficult, but it is also desirable, which is if you have no further need, if there was an episode or something happened in your life when an antidepressant seemed to be the right step for you to take, and those conditions are now long past, something my psychiatrist colleagues, friends, tell me they see patients like this all the time, well, then you need to reevaluate the need for continuing to take that drug, and you need to take careful steps with your physician to taper it very carefully.
Thomas J. Moore, thank you so much for talking with us on the People's Pharmacy today.
It was a pleasure to be here.
You've been listening to Thomas J. Moore. He's Senior Scientist for Drug Safety and Policy at the Institute for Safe Medication Practices. He's responsible for the analysis found in Quarter Watch, monitoring FDA MedWatch reports. His article on utilization of psychiatric drugs was published last year in JAMA Internal Medicine. You'll find a link to it from peoplespharmacy.com.
You'll also find a link to the Institute for Safe Medication Practices and Tom Moore's Quarter Watch. After the break, we'll talk about taking more than one drug to treat a mental illness.
How often are these drugs prescribed for people who have not been diagnosed with a psychiatric disorder?
Coming up, we talk with psychiatrist Samantha Boardman about how she uses medications as well as non-drug approaches to help people with depression and other psychological challenges.
You're listening to The People's Pharmacy with Joe and Terry Graydon. If you value the health information you get when you listen to The People's Pharmacy, consider subscribing to our email newsletter. You'll get the latest health news and information on upcoming podcasts delivered to your inbox twice a week. Look for the link at peoplespharmacy.com.
Welcome back to the People's Pharmacy. I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. The People's Pharmacy is brought to you in part by Red X Industries, makers of Utterly Smooth Foot Cream with shea butter, helping dry, cracked feet feel utterly soft and smooth. 800-345-7339. Online at uttercream.com.
To order a CD of today's show or any People's Pharmacy broadcast, you can call 800-732-2334. Today's show is 1075, or you can find it on the web at peoplespharmacy.com.
Today we're talking about the medications that are used to treat mental illness. We're looking at these widely used drugs from a variety of perspectives. Many report that they derive benefit from such treatments. We would like to emphasize that no one should ever stop taking any prescribed medicine without their doctor's assistance.
Our guest is Dr. Samantha Boardman. She is a clinical instructor in psychiatry and attending psychiatrist at Weill Cornell Medical College. She's also the founder of PositivePrescription.com, a website that combines her training from medical school and psychiatry with her work and training in the field of positive psychology.
Dr. Samantha Boardman, welcome to the People's Pharmacy.
Thank you so much, Joe and Terry. I'm thrilled to be here.
We are so pleased to have you. Dr. Boardman, there was an article not too long ago in JAMA Internal Medicine. It suggested that what is called polypharmacy, which means multiple medications, especially in the field of your area of expertise, mental health, antidepressants, sleeping pills, antipsychotics, drugs for pain, they're going up dramatically, doubling over the last 10 years in older people. Does that concern you?
Yes, absolutely. It does. And, this is for people over 65, and just seeing this dramatic increase, it's pretty shocking. And, we know for the elderly that it is sometimes hard for them to keep track of the medications that they're taking. And they often have these tackle boxes, of pills, and it can get really confusing. And the concern is around falling and confusion as well over what they're taking. Are they, confusing that with a heart medication? And sometimes a doctor will just start them on something because there is an issue maybe around difficulty sleeping, or maybe for depression, and then they'll just never take them off of it. It's just added to the pile. And I was stunned to see those numbers.
One of the things that really fascinated us is that in a fairly large proportion of the cases, the people have not actually been diagnosed with insomnia or depression or something else that would substantiate this prescription.
And I think that sort of speaks to a broader issue around, like, a lot of the people who are taking antidepressants, below 65 as well, are not necessarily diagnosed with depression or anxiety, and they're taking it sort of for off-label reasons. And it seems from most studies suggest that antidepressants work best with people who are suffering from severe depressions and less well for, mild to moderate depression. So it's interesting to see, why is this number increasing? And the numbers don't seem to pan out. It's not that we're seeing this epidemic of depression.
Well, what
right
you're
now.
suggesting is really fascinating, because I think most people don't appreciate the fact that while these drugs have been shown to work for major depression, that for mild to moderate, which is what most people experience and for which they go to see a health professional, maybe not a mental health professional, but just, their primary practice physician or an internist, they are being put on antidepressants, whether it's the old-fashioned ones we refer to as the tricyclics, or whether it's the newer ones, the SSRIs or the SNRIs. In your experience, how effective are these drugs for mild to moderate depression, and are there any side effects? Because I think a lot of people assume, wow, everybody's taking them, they must be super safe.
Oh, absolutely. And it's become, I think the norms have changed so much around perception, so it's just so much more open to talk about these types of things. And the perception is that there are very few side effects. And that's not really true, and we have no idea about the long-term use of these medications. And the studies suggest that a third of people who have severe depression seem to get better. A third see some improvement, and a third, doesn't really seem to help at all. But just to push back a little bit, I think often doctors get a really bad rap for prescribing it. But there is also, I think we live in a world that has, a quick fix and immediate gratification demand. And so if people aren't feeling so good, or they're just like a little bit down, or, they've broken up with somebody, or they're having issues at work, something like that, that they might want to, when they go to their doctor, they might convey that, and they would like a prescription in hand, to walk out the door, that this is going to help me feel better, rather than thinking of other avenues that they might want to pursue.
Well, that's what I would like to ask you about. What sorts of other avenues are available when someone is feeling bad, going through a bad breakup, whether it's divorce or something similar? What sorts of avenues do they have available to help them feel better?
Well, I think one of the best thing we can do, and it's the opposite of what we want to do when we're feeling bad. We want to fold in on ourselves and focus on ourselves. And people often come to see a psychiatrist at these inflection points. And, they'll say, I just want to be happy, or I just want to find myself. And I think this focus on oneself that actually sort of, can amplify this experience of stress or depression. And it's, when we sort of look outward sometimes and focus on what's outside of us and beyond us, helping others, contributing, adding value in some way. And we know that social networks really can, like having that shoulder to lean on. I was just looking at a study showing that walking uphill, a hill seems less steep if you're doing it with a friend or someone you love. That if you know that there is somebody you can call, you can spend time with, or who'll reach out to you at these moments, it's much more comforting. And maybe part of these numbers we're seeing with the antidepressants is maybe, are we living sort of more isolated from one another? Or do we have more quote unquote friends on social media than we do actual friends? Are we spending our time rather than cultivating real friendships? Are we spending our time online doing something else?
Well, Dr. Boardman, what you say rings so true for me, because I know that if I've had a really bad day, everything goes wrong and I'm sort of feeling sorry for myself. But if I've got a tennis game scheduled and I end up on the tennis court and there are my buddies just waiting and they're welcoming me, and then, we're into the game and we're chatting and we're having fun, that day just disappears. And all of a sudden, it's like, I'm having a great day. And I'm out of myself, and I'm not ruminating, and I'm not worried about all the nastiness that may have taken place. It just changes my outlook within minutes.
Isn't it amazing, though? And you highlight two really important points. It's that social connection, being with others, getting outside of yourself, and also you're talking about being active, that physical, exertion of energy, and you're doing the opposite of what you want to do. Had that tennis game not been planned, you might have just sort of wanted to crawl under the covers and binge watch TV or eat a bucket of ice cream. So oftentimes I think the thing that's the opposite of how we feel in the moment, and it's why I say, sometimes the advice like you only live once or live in the moment is really, really bad advice, because you do the thing that's going to amplify your stress or your depression or, whatever is going wrong. And you get this double whammy effect then of the stress or a bad day. And doing the opposite of what you feel like can be really helpful, like, going to play tennis, spending time with friends, because otherwise you might just want to cancel anything you were going to do. Spending time in nature. I remember in medical school, I never, I learned how many milligrams I should prescribe for this and that, and I was really good at dialing down misery, I thought. But it never occurred to me to focus on anything else. And I remember stumbling across a study years after I graduated about, I think it was at Duke University, and they were looking at people who exercised, who were mild to moderately depressed versus those who were given an antidepressant. And both groups seemed to do better within like 6 or 7 weeks, but it was over the long term, the exercising group. I think they were on a treadmill for like 20 to 30 minutes a day, 4 days a week. It wasn't a whole lot of exercise, felt much better in the long term, and were much less likely to have relapsed.
And of course,
I prescribe that.
Oh, that's great. So you actually do write people
I prescribe exercise, literally, and I actually write it on a prescription pad because I think it helps to think that way. I prescribe nature. It's really important to spend time in nature. I prescribe like doing nice things for other people. I prescribe volunteering. I prescribe purpose. I think all these things really, really, you're asking about what else can you do? And I think those are many different avenues to pursue.
Dr. Boardman, you're practicing in New York City.
Yes.
How do you prescribe nature?
Well, we have Central Park. Looking at these studies, we know that people who actually have a window or can see green outside after a surgical procedure are going to recover more quickly. They'll require less pain medication. And I really take that to heart. It might even be just having a plant on your desk or even as your screensaver. But if you can get outside during lunch or for 20 minutes and go with a friend, you get the added benefit of the socialization and, being outdoors at least. It's really helpful. And if you're close to Central Park or remotely sort of close to any park, I really advise just going there and without your phone, leave it in the office.
Now, Dr. Boardman, everything you say just resonates on the People's Pharmacy because this is a message that we like to communicate on a regular basis. And I also empathize and maybe even sympathize with your colleagues who, a patient comes in and says, "Oh, doctor, I'd really like to get, a medication. Do have something you can prescribe for fill in the blank. I'm feeling anxious, I'm feeling down, I'm not getting enough sleep. Can't you write me something? And part of that has to do with all of those commercials that we see on television, because when that Luna moth comes flitting in through the window and that woman looks like she is sleeping so peacefully because of the medication, I think it was Lunesta, it's like, well, why wouldn't I want something that'll let me sleep like she does? I mean, that looks so wonderful. We also see commercials for antipsychotic medications that are added to antidepressants to help people overcome depression. And there are these cartoon characters that you sometimes see, and people look like they are having so much fun. And if you're down in the dumps and you're feeling really depressed, you want something to get you out of that hole.
Of course, if people on the ads are having a lot of fun, you should really pay close attention to what's going on in the audio, because that's when they're running all the horrible side effects.
It's so true. And some of them are really terrifying. And that's a really important part, I think, of what you're saying is, because people will come in, they'll tear something out of a magazine. What about this for sleep issues I'm having? And those butterflies are, I've seen so many ads that people have brought in with that on them. And I really need to sleep. And that's such an issue. But I feel it's my responsibility to educate them about the side effects, and that this might also cause this, and this. And to also try to empower them about what is available to them and at their fingertips. And, that's one thing to sort of passively give somebody a prescription for a medication, and they go to the pharmacy and they fill it and they take this every day. But I think also to actively engage in your own wellness is very different, and to sort of take charge of that and to track it yourself. And that's what I try to talk about. It's important, though, I think, for patients to feel that power and a sense of control over what they do. And with sleep, there's so many different things that they could do. How often, do they sleep with their phone on or in their beds? Things like that. Do they have a TV in their bedroom? Are they watching the news late at night? How much coffee are they drinking? How much soda are they drinking? Before they go to bed, things like that can just make these little tweaks and interventions that can make such a difference, and these incremental changes that can really add up to a whole lot of well-being. And when they're participating in their own health, I think it's much more engaging.
Well, those commercials do seem so appealing, and it's easy to understand why people would ask their doctor. And many of the physicians who are prescribing these drugs are not psychiatrists like you are. And so they may not understand all of the intricacies of the medications, especially when it comes time to trying to stop them. Because it's very easy to start taking a drug like sertraline or Cymbalta or duloxetine. It's a little harder to stop. Can you talk a little bit about withdrawal?
That can be really difficult for patients. And that's also one of the things when somebody comes in saying, I would like X, Y, or Z, that, I'll say it can be pretty tough getting off some of this stuff. And usually, people like to Google stuff and find lots of information. There's a lot of misinformation out there as well. But sometimes if they are big Googlers anyway, I'll say, look at some of the side effects, look at some of the withdrawal. And even I've had to taper people with using some medications, literally like 0.5 milligrams a day. And it's taken a month to do it because they were having such severe side effects, like shooting pains and like their nerves tingling and headaches. And it's not, that you can like flip a switch and it's, back to normal for a lot of people. And I think it's why just a lot of people who are on any of these medications, they haven't seen a psychiatrist or a mental health professional or even a doctor within a year. They just get a year's prescription for it. And it just never occurs to them to go off of it. And that maybe this sort of served its purpose, even if it did at some point in their life, and that maybe they should consider tapering off or going off of it, probably with the guidance. And they will need to see somebody, a psychiatrist probably to help them taper off of it.
Dr. Boardman, you've written about an interaction that you had with a patient in which she said, I just feel worse every time I come to see you. Well, that made you feel pretty bad. So tell us about the aha moment right after that.
It was pretty embarrassing. I thought I was making a lot of headway with a wonderful young woman who was a mother of 3 kids, and she was having a lot of issues with her husband, and she was feeling depressed and anxious and stressed out. And I thought we were making tremendous headway, and I had prescribed an antidepressant for her that she had refused to take, actually, and would see each other once a week. And one day when she came in and said, you know what, Dr. Boardman, I hate coming here. I hate seeing you. I'm actually sometimes having a good day, and I have to think of things that are going wrong in my life to complain about and to, then think about, issues with my husband. And all we do is talk about everything that makes me miserable in here. And we never talk about anything else, and I'm done, and I don't want to see you again. And it was a real wake-up call for me because it had never occurred to me to focus on anything else other than trying to make her a little bit less miserable, trying to dial down the conflict with her husband or, the stress with her children, and to focus on wellness and health and help her find sort of her strength within her stress. And it's never been good advice, I think, to tell people to get rid of the stress in their lives. And I think I told her that a lot, and she was doing some pro bono work as a lawyer somewhere, and I thought that was too stressful for her. But I was missing the point that was also incredibly meaningful for her. There were so many things I think I was doing wrong at the time, and I think it's Henry Ford who said if you'd asked people at the time what they had wanted, they would have said better horses. And I think that's what I was always looking for, was better horses. It never occurred to me to, imagine a car, which was the field of positive psychology. And I ended up going back to school and getting a degree in positive psychology that's more the science of health and wellness.
Dr. Samantha Boardman, thank you so much for talking with us on the People's Pharmacy today.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
You've been listening to Dr. Samantha Boardman. She's clinical instructor in psychiatry and attending psychiatrist at Weill Cornell Medical College. She's also the founder of positiveprescription.com, a website that combines her training from medical school in psychiatry with her work and training in the field of positive psychology. You'll find a link to it from peoplespharmacy.com.
Lynn Siegel produced today's show. Al Wodarski is the engineer. Dave Graydon edits our interviews.
The People's Pharmacy is produced at the studios of North Carolina Public Radio, WUNC.
The People's Pharmacy theme music is by B.J. Liederman.
The People's Pharmacy is made possible by Red X Industries, makers of Utterly Smooth Extra Care 20 Cream with 20% urea for extra skin protection. The number is 800-345-7339. The website is uttercream.com.
If you would like to purchase a CD of today's show or any other People's Pharmacy broadcast, you can call 800-732-2334. Today's show is number 1075. That number again, 800-732-2334, online at peoplespharmacy.com.
When you visit our site, you can check out information on prescription drugs, herbal medicines, and home remedies. Please share your thoughts on today's show. We'd love to have your feedback.
At our website, you can also sign up for our free online newsletter or the free podcast of the show. Listen at your own convenience or share it with a friend. It's all there at peoplespharmacy.com.
Become a friend of the People's Pharmacy on Facebook. In Durham, North Carolina, I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. Thank you for listening. Please join us again next week.
We hope you enjoyed this podcast. If so, please consider taking a minute to write a review on iTunes. And thanks for listening to the People's Pharmacy.
When it comes to Father's Day, dads want steak. And the experts at Omaha Steaks are making it easy for you to deliver uncompromising quality with gifts that are sure to make his day. Plus, get an extra $35 off with code THANKSDAD when you shop at omahasteaks.com today. But don't wait. Father's Day is June 15th. Shop now at omahasteaks.com and get an extra $35 off with code THANKSDAD. Minimum purchase may apply. See site for details.